Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled, The Seeker's Spiral: The Awakening of the Watcher. The rain fell hard that night, lashing against the ancient tiled roof of the Willow Crest Monastery. The stone pathways, worn smooth by centuries of quiet footsteps, now gleamed beneath the storm like silver veins. Thunder cracked open the sky as if the heavens themselves were bearing witness to a moment written in fate. Beneath the high arch of the monastery's east gate, an old monk named Brother Alwyn lit a lantern. His hands trembled with age, yet his heart remained sharp. Something had disturbed the protective wards carved into the wooden beams. He could feel it in his bones. Then he saw it. A child. No more than 5, soaked to the bone, standing barefoot in the mud. The boy's wide eyes shimmered with a strange light, not fear, not confusion, but something else. He did not cry. He simply stared past Brother Alwyn, as if seeing things that were not meant for this world. The monks found no trace of parents or guardians. Only a thin pendant around his neck, a black obsidian disc etched with unfamiliar runes. When asked his name, the boy said nothing. It wasn't until days later, after waking from a fevered dream, that he whispered a word. Salem. And so he was named. Years passed. The monastery became home, but Salem remained a mystery even to those who raised him. He spoke rarely, ate sparingly, and often vanished into the graveyard behind the stone chapel. The other orphans feared the place, yet he found it peaceful. The cold didn't seem to bother him, nor the shadows that danced among the headstones. Brother Alwyn, now his closest guardian, noticed other things too. Candles flickered violently when Salem was near. Animals avoided him. Once, during morning prayer, an ancient scroll fell open on its own, revealing a forgotten passage about those who can see through the veil. Salem could see them. Spirits. They came at night, some whispering, others crying, a few just watching. He never told the monks. He wasn't afraid, but he understood, even as a child, that fear was a fire easily lit in others. At 12, he began dreaming of a woman. She always stood in the rain, holding a lifeless child to her chest. Her face was obscured, but her voice etched itself into his mind like a wound. Find the seal. Before they do, break the chain. Every night, the same vision. Every night, the same pull, like a tide dragging him deeper into something vast and ancient. One day, while tending the library, Salem found an old journal sealed with wax. It belonged to a former monk named Theron, who disappeared decades ago under mysterious circumstances. Inside were notes about the gifted ones, children born under a blood moon who could see beyond the mortal veil. Some became seers, some healers. and some, warriors against the darkness. Near the final page, Theron had written, "The seal must be protected. If broken, it will not only unbind the cursed but awaken the watcher beneath the roots." Salem didn't know what the watcher was, but the name alone sent a chill through his bones. When he showed the journal to Brother Alwyn, the old monk turned pale. "You shouldn't have found this," he said, voice heavy with something between fear and sorrow. "But perhaps it was time." That night, Alwyn led Salem to the deepest chamber of the monastery, one sealed by iron doors and hidden behind layers of prayer scrolls. Inside lay a small wooden box, carved from dark wood and bound by golden threads of ancient script. It was warm to the touch, humming with subtle power. Within it was a seal, an insignia molded into obsidian, nearly identical to the pendant Salem wore as a child. "This," said Alwyn, "was left for you by someone who knew what you were. This is the seal of the dying sun." Salem's hand hovered over it. The room seemed to breathe, the air thickening with unseen force. "You are not cursed," Alwyn continued. "You are chosen. Not by us. By something older." Then came the choice, to live as he was and ignore the call, or to begin the path of awakening. Salem chose the path. That same night, during a cleansing ritual in the monastery's courtyard, the flames of the offering bowl turned black. Wind surged through the sacred ground. And from the edges of the forest, unseen eyes began to watch. Something ancient had stirred. And so began the journey of Salem, the child born of storm and shadow who would one day stand between the light of the world and the darkness that would devour it. He was no longer just a boy abandoned in the rain. He was a seeker. And his story had only just begun. The stars hung low above the monastery that night, thick with silver light, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Salem sat alone on the cold floor of the east chamber, the obsidian seal cradled in his hands. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. Alive. Watching. Since touching it, the world had begun to change. Shadows moved where they should not. He heard whispers beneath the wind, and sometimes when he closed his eyes he glimpsed flashes of another place. A forest of bones. A tower without windows. A woman screaming, her voice lost to the void. He had not told Brother Alwyn. Not yet. The old monk was not what he once was. His steps had grown slower, his breath thinner. Yet his eyes remained sharp, always watching Salem with a gaze that held both pride and quiet dread. One morning, Alwyn summoned him to the forbidden garden behind the chapel. It was a place few dared walk, overgrown with black vines and ancient statues worn faceless by time. "You've seen them, haven't you?" Alwyn asked. Salem hesitated, then nodded. "The spirits." He nodded again. Alwyn breathed deeply and lowered himself onto a moss-covered stone bench. "Then your time here is coming to an end. Sa-Elam tensed. You're sending me away. No, the monk said. The path is. This monastery was never meant to be your home forever. It was a cradle. And all cradles must be left behind. The silence between them was thick. Wind tugged at Sa-Elam's robes. You remember the journal? Alwyn continued. Theron, the monk who wrote it, he wasn't just a scholar. He was a warden. A protector of the veil. Like you. Sa-Elam blinked. There are more like me. There were. Once. A shadow crossed Alwyn's face. Most of them fell. Others disappeared. Some. Worse. He handed Sa-Elam a scroll wrapped in crimson silk. This is the rite of sight. It's how you cross the threshold between the worlds. But be warned, it may show you things you are not ready to see. Later that night, under the full moon, Sa-Elam entered the chapel alone. Candles lit themselves at his presence. The obsidian seal around his neck grew warm. He sat within a circle of salt and ash, unrolling the scroll slowly. Each word he read echoed like thunder in his skull. And as he spoke the final line, the floor beneath him cracked open. A blinding light engulfed the room. When he could see again, Sa-Elam was no longer in the chapel. He stood inside a vast, empty hall made entirely of mirrors. Each one shimmered with images, reflections of possible lives, alternate selves, moments that never were. Some mirrors showed him as a hero clad in golden armor. Others as a broken man, hollow-eyed and cloaked in blood. Then he saw her. The woman from his dreams. But this time, her face was clear. She had silver hair braided in coils down her back, her skin pale as moonlight, and eyes black as void. The child in her arms was not dead. Not yet. But fading, dissolving like mist. "You found the seal," she said, her voice a thousand whispers at once. "Who are you?" Sa-Elam asked. "A fragment," she replied. "Of what once was. Of what still waits." "For what?" "For you." She extended a hand, but just before he could reach it, a figure emerged behind her. A tall man cloaked in ash-gray robes, his face hidden behind a bone mask shaped like a serpent. His presence froze the mirror's surface, shattering the reflections around them. "The Watcher sees you now," the woman whispered, backing away. "He cannot touch you yet. But he will send others. Hollow ones. Seekers of the seal." "What is the seal?" Sa-Elam asked desperately. "The key," she said. "And the lock." The chamber darkened. The mirrors turned black, and the woman's form began to unravel. "Wait." but she was gone. And then Salem was falling, spiraling through a tunnel of screaming voices and blinking eyes. He landed hard on the chapel floor, gasping for air. The candles had all blown out. The obsidian seal glowed red-hot against his chest. Brother Alwyn rushed in moments later. But one look at Salem's face, and he didn't ask anything. He simply placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "It has begun." Later, over bitterroot tea, Alwyn explained what little he knew. The Watcher is ancient, older than this land, older than our gods. He was bound long ago by those who wielded the 9 seals. One of them is yours. If it breaks, the prison breaks. Then why give it to me? Salem demanded. Because it was always yours. Because you must decide whether to guard it or use it. The next morning, Salem left the monastery. The monks gave him provisions, a staff carved from whisperwood, and a cloak stitched with protection runes. Alwyn watched from the gate, eyes filled with sorrow and pride. "You'll find the others," the old monk said. "And when you do, you'll need to decide, protect the veil or tear it down." Salem stepped into the forest, the seal burning quietly beneath his tunic. Ahead lay secrets, ghosts, and truths older than the stars. And the path of the seeker had truly begun. The village of Brackenfield was nothing more than a scatter of cottages nestled between hills of mist and moss. The air was damp with the scent of pine and peat, and the roads were little more than muddy trails carved by decades of wandering hooves and tired boots. Yet there was something in that place, a wrongness that pulsed beneath the soil, like a heartbeat too slow to belong to anything living. Salem had been walking for 2 days through the fog-drenched forest before the village appeared beyond the ridge. His feet were blistered, his cloak soaked through, and the seal at his chest had grown cold, almost dormant. But the moment his boots touched the path leading into Brackenfield, it shivered against his skin as if stirred awake by the scent of death. The first person he met was a boy. Maybe 10 years old. Standing alone beside the crooked fence of a goat pen, his face smeared with ash, his eyes hollow. "Are you the one who talks to the dead?" the boy asked. Salem blinked. "Who told you that?" "My mother. She's one of them now." The boy turned and pointed toward a ramshackle cottage at the edge of the woods. Smoke curled black and slow from its chimney, even though the hearth had long been cold. Inside, Salem found silence. The kind of silence that settles over a room where something once screamed and has since gone still. The boy's mother, her name was Mira, had died only 3 nights ago. Illness, they said. Fever and fits. But when Salem asked to see her grave, the boy's grandmother shook her head violently. "She's not buried. None of them are. They don't stay put." He learned that 8 villagers had died in the last month, each from different causes, each under strange circumstances. A man choked on air while sitting at breakfast. A young woman bled from her eyes after a wedding. A child vanished in her sleep, only for her laughter to echo through the woods days later. And none of the dead could be buried. For each night after the funeral rites, the ground split open, and the bodies were unearthed, dragged back to the surface by something that refused to let them rest. "They're not ghosts," said old Mara, the healer. "They're puppets. Hollowed out and filled with something foul." That night, Salem was offered the hayloft in the barn behind the chapel. He did not sleep. Around midnight, the fog crept in thicker than before. And with it came the whispers. Voices that tickled the edge of his mind, soft, desperate, calling names he didn't know. He stepped out of the barn and followed them. The graveyard was waiting. Rows of tilted stones shone wet under the moonlight. The earth beneath them quivered, not like breath but like hunger. Then it moved. From beneath a fresh grave, something rose. Not a corpse. Not truly. It was what remained of Mira, her face stretched like wax over a broken skull, her mouth sewn shut with coarse black thread. Her eyes bled smoke. And behind her came others, men, women, even children staggering out from the soil, all with mouths sealed. Salem stepped forward. The seal on his chest burned hot. They did not attack. They stood, waiting. He raised his hand, whispering a blessing from the monastery. But the moment the words left his lips, Mira's head snapped toward him, her mouth tearing open along the stitches. The sound that escaped was not a scream. It was a song. Low. Wordless. Dissonant. And it echoed in Salem's bones. Suddenly, the seal at his chest cracked with light. The undead recoiled, hissing, shrinking back toward their graves. From the woods beyond the graves, something watched. A figure. Tall, wearing robes like rotted leaves, face hidden beneath a mask shaped like a weeping willow. It raised a hand and the dead crumpled to the earth like discarded dolls. Then the figure turned and vanished into the forest. Salem chased. Branches whipped his face. Thorns tore at his arms. The forest grew darker with every step, as if light itself had abandoned him. He reached a clearing and found nothing, no figure, no trace. Only a circle of stones, ancient and cracked, and in their center, a mark scorched into the earth. The same mark that lay at the center of his seal. He fell to his knees, breath heaving. The forest whispered, "Watcher! Watcher!" And then it stopped. By dawn, the villagers found him seated among the graves, surrounded by disturbed earth and a dozen lifeless bodies that no longer rose. The curse was broken. For now. Old Mara brought him tea, her eyes wary. "You did something, boy. I don't know what. But the dead sleep again." Salem nodded, but said nothing. In truth, he didn't know either. He only knew that whatever was stirring beyond the veil had touched Brack Enfield and it had seen him. Before he left, the boy who had first met him placed a small bundle in his hand. Inside was a ribbon once worn by Mira when she was alive. "Keep it," the boy said. "So you don't forget her face. So you remember what they take." Salem tucked the ribbon into his satchel beside the seal. Then, he walked away from Brack Enfield, deeper into the wilds, where whispers became wind and the earth grew colder with each step. The path of the seeker had revealed its first wound. And it would not be the last. The road to Hollow Vale wound through a valley where the wind forgot to sing. It was a land stained with stillness. Trees leaned crookedly toward the path, branches gnarled like pleading hands. The sky never fully brightened, caught between dawn and dusk, and the animals when Salem spotted them moved in silence, as if afraid to breathe too loudly. The deeper he walked, the more he felt it, the pressure of something watching, just out of sight. Villagers in Brack Enfield had warned him of Hollow Vale. They called it the Dead Town, though no plague had touched it. No fire. No flood. People had simply stopped living there. And those who went in to check, didn't always come back. But a letter had reached the monastery months ago, written in blood and sealed with ash. The silence is rising. Please, send someone who knows the old ways. It had waited, unread, at the bottom of the monastery's archives. Now, Salem carried it in his satchel. As he passed beneath the moss-choked arch that marked the village gate, the obsidian seal at his chest trembled like a frightened bird. Hollow Vale was not abandoned. Smoke coiled from chimneys, doors hung slightly ajar, but not a soul was in sight. No children's laughter, no merchant cries. Only the slow creak of a weather vane, spinning in windless air. The first body he found sat upright in a rocking chair. A woman, her skin pale as wax, her eyes glassy and open. She was smiling softly, eerily though her lips had long since dried and cracked. In her lap, a book rested, the pages blank, but warm to the touch. When Salem reached out to close her eyes, the seal against his chest pulsed. And then, the woman blinked. She did not speak. Her mouth opened, but only dust came out. And then she slumped forward. Lifeless once more. Salem staggered back, heart pounding. Whatever gripped this place, it blurred the lines between life and death. Between memory and presence. The chapel stood at the village's center, its spire leaning slightly, as if bowing to some unseen weight. As Salem entered, he saw the signs of ritual: a crude circle of dried blood, feathers from carrion birds, bones arranged into a crooked star. This had not been a house of worship for decades. It had become a cage. Carved into the altar was the word Pshkar. A name. Or something more. As Salem examined the markings, the air grew thick. The pews began to tremble. And from the shadows behind the altar, something stepped forward. It wore no face. Only a burlap sack, stitched where eyes should be, and a neck wound wrapped in chains of silver. It moved like a marionette, jerky, unnatural, and in its hand, it held a lantern that burned with violet flame. "Who are you?" Salem demanded, summoning a small flare of light to his palm. The figure said nothing. But the lantern flared and the fuse erupted. From the wood and stone, people emerged. Not walking. Floating. Gliding. Dozens of villagers, mouths sewn shut, hands pressed together in silent prayer, surrounding Salem with steps that made no sound. He raised the seal. It burned brightly, but the light did not repel them. They did not attack. They wept. Tears flowed freely from their stitched eyes, falling onto the chapel floor. And all the while, the faceless figure pointed its lantern toward the ceiling where a mural, long faded, now shimmered with sudden clarity. It showed a tree, its roots deep in a pit of skulls, its branches coiled around a burning eye in the sky. The words beneath it read, "Let silence reign, that the watcher may wake." Suddenly, the weeping stopped. The villagers screamed not with voices, but through the very walls. The wood split. Glass shattered inward. And the figure vanished in a gust of cold so violent it threw Salem backward against the altar. The seal burned hot against his chest. Through the pain, he chanted a rite. One he barely remembered learning. An incantation passed through his dreams from the woman in the mirror hall. His blood ran from a gash on his temple, spilling across the ritual lines. As the last word left his lips, the lantern's flame in the vision cracked and died. The villagers collapsed. Still. Breathing. Freed. Salem woke hours later. The chapel was empty. The symbols had burned away. Only ash remained, and silence returned, this time peaceful, not cursed. He found a journal buried beneath the altar written by a man named Elder Voren, once the town's priest. In its pages, Voren described a being known as Vshkar, a servant of the Watcher, who fed on noise, light, and life. The townsfolk had tried to appease it, performing quiet rites to keep it asleep. But someone had broken the cycle. They had tried to bind the spirit. But spirits tied in fear, always escape in screams. Salem stayed one final night in Hollow Vale. The villagers, slowly waking from their half-death slumber, remembered little. Only dreams of drowning in whispers, and a face behind a burlap mask. As he left, a girl no older than 9 handed him a piece of folded parchment. On it, crudely drawn, was the tree from the mural, but with 9 eyes instead of 1. Beneath it, in her uneven handwriting, were 3 words. "It sees now." Salem felt the seal tremble again. Whatever was watching through the veil was no longer asleep, and it had turned its gaze toward him. The sky over Grenmere was always gray. Not the heavy gray of storm or the quiet hush before snow, but the dull, constant gray of a sky that had forgotten how to feel. Salem approached the town as dusk began to settle. The road dipped through a grove of thin, lifeless trees, their branches sharp like bone. He passed stone markers half sunken in the soil, each etched with names worn down by wind. The townsfolk no longer visited their dead. They were too afraid to remember. Grenmere was a village that whispered behind its shutters and locked its doors before sunset. No children played in the yards. No lanterns burned on window sills. As Salem stepped through the gate, his seal burned low and slow against his chest like a warning that pulsed rather than screamed. The air was wrong here. Not thick with death, like brack and field. Not hollow like Hollow Vale. No. This place reeked of something older. Of guilt. He found the inn abandoned. Dust thick on the counters, food rotted in bowls. Yet there were signs of recent activity, footprints in the ash, teacups washed and stacked, candles melted only halfway. It was as if the inhabitants had vanished mid-step. Salem set his pack down and explored deeper. Behind the inn was a wide square, and in its center stood the church. Not the typical chapel of his upbringing, but a looming, twisted structure made of black stone. Its steeple was broken. Its windows boarded. Yet from behind one shutter, light flickered dim and golden, as if fire struggled to survive inside. He approached. The door opened before he touched it. A woman stood there. Middle-aged, pale, with hair braided tightly against her skull. Her eyes were the same dull gray as the sky. "You're late," she said. Salem blinked. "You were expecting me." "Not you. Someone." She stepped aside. "Doesn't matter. Come in." Inside, the church was hollowed out, pews broken, altar stripped bare. A circle of stones had been laid in the nave, surrounding a crude wooden statue of a woman cradling a faceless child. Candles flickered weakly along the walls, but their flames leaned away from the center as if afraid. "I'm Mara," the woman said. "Last keeper of Grenmere." "Keeper?" Her lips tightened. Once, every village had one. Someone to speak for the dead. To warn the living. We used to have rites. Offerings. But things change. Salem moved closer to the statue. "What happened here?" Mara did not answer at first. Then she whispered, her name was Aline. The room darkened. She was married to the mayor, a cruel man, all charm in public and rot in private. When their first child died in childbirth, he blamed her. Said she carried a curse. When the second was stillborn, he banished her from their home. The third. She hid the pregnancy. Gave birth in silence, in the attic of this church. Mara's voice cracked. But the child didn't cry. Didn't move. And Aline, grief-stricken, broken, walked to the town square and burned herself alive with the infant in her arms. Saelim's breath caught in his throat. They say she screamed just one word, why? After that night, the village began to change. Children fell ill. Wells soured. Cattle refused to bear young. And always that question echoed on the wind. Why? The statue in the church had been erected by grieving villagers, not out of love but out of fear. And still the haunting continued. Now, years later, only a handful of residents remain, those too stubborn or too haunted to leave. They say her spirit roams still, Mira said. But not as herself. She wears others now. Enters them. Speaks through them. As if on cue, the seal on Saelim's chest seared with sudden heat. A scream echoed through the village square. They rushed outside to find a young man collapsed on the stones, his eyes rolled back, mouth agape. From his throat, a woman's voice burst forth, raw, broken, ragged with sorrow. You left me. Saelim knelt, drawing a warding sigil in the dirt, pressing his palm to the boy's forehead. Aline, he said softly. I see you. The boy's limbs stiffened. His back arched. You took everything. All of you. You watched me burn. The sky darkened. The statue behind them cracked. And then, from the church's broken steeple, a single bell tolled. Not struck by hand, but by will. A call. An accusation. A curse. Aline rose not in body, but in spirit. She appeared behind the crowd, tall, cloaked in black smoke, her face pale and blank, save for the mouth sewn shut. But her scream tore through the silence all the same. Candles exploded. Windows shattered. People fell to their knees, clutching their heads, sobbing not in pain, but in memory. Each one reliving the moment they had looked away, ignored her cries, believed the mayor's lies. Saelim stood tall. He chanted words he barely understood, phrases from the monastery's forbidden book, teachings passed in secret from Alwyn in his final weeks. The air thickened. The earth groaned. He drew a circle of salt and ash. Inside it, he placed the seal. Aline, he whispered, you are heard. The wind howled. You are seen. Thunder split the sky. You are remembered. And then, in the silence that followed, he poured water from the church's last font over the seal and spoke her name once more. Aline. The spirit paused. The scream died. Her form shrank, dimmed, softened. And for the first time in a century, the villagers saw her weep not in rage, but in sorrow. She vanished. The boy awoke, confused, and crying. the bell never tolled again. Days later, Salem stood alone before the black statue. He carved a single line at its base. "Let no grief be forgotten." Mara handed him a parchment before he left. "A list," she said, "of other places like this. Towns that carry old wounds. You'll be needed again." He tucked the paper away. And as he passed the border of Grenmere, the seal at his chest no longer burned. It pulsed quietly. A heartbeat of the forgotten. The rain began as a whisper. A soft mist curling over the treetops as Salem descended the narrow, winding trail into Black Hollow. With each step, the world dimmed. Light seemed to thin here as if swallowed by the damp earth itself. Even the birds, which had followed him for miles, refused to cross the threshold into the hollow. They perched along the tree line, silent as statues, watching. The path led him to an abandoned watchtower overlooking a valley consumed by graves. It was not a cemetery in the usual sense. There were no fences, no markers, no paths. Only stones, hundreds, maybe thousands of them standing upright in loose, uneven rows. Some carved, others bare, and many leaning at odd angles, as if disturbed by something shifting underneath. He had been walking for days since leaving Grenmere, following the map Mara had given him. Black Hollow had once been a place of rest for wandering monks and the war dead. Now, it was merely forgotten. The seal pulsed faintly beneath his cloak, but with a strange rhythm, like the pacing of something buried. The last village he'd passed warned him, "Don't sleep near the stones. And whatever you do, don't follow the singing." But of course, Salem had never been good at staying away from danger. He set camp under a broken canopy of trees near the southern edge of the grave field. He did not light a fire. Something about the wind here disliked flames. It shifted whenever he tried snuffing sparks, scattering twigs. So he sat in the dark, back against a mossy boulder, listening to the hollow breathe. At midnight, the singing began. A woman's voice. Faint. Distant. Melody strange and drifting without rhythm or chorus, like a lullaby sung in reverse. Salem's eyes opened, his fingers curling around the obsidian seal at his chest. It had gone ice cold. He stood. The voice was calling. Not to him, but to something else. He followed. Through the rows of stone, where mist clung like cobwebs and the trees whispered names he didn't know. The singing grew louder, more sorrowful. The melody turned into weeping. And then he saw her. A woman, or the shape of one. Pale, long-haired, wrapped in a funeral shroud that trailed like smoke behind her. She knelt beside an unmarked grave, her hands clawing gently at the soil, whispering. "Where did you go? Where did you go?" She turned. But she had no face. Only the outline of sorrow, two empty sockets, a mouth that did not move. and tears that streamed from eyes that weren't there. Sa-Elam froze. The seal burned. He whispered a binding chant. But the spirit ignored him. It rose, slowly, head tilted in confusion. Then it spoke not from its mouth, but from the wind itself. You are not him. Sa-Elam's skin chilled. Who? He asked. The one who buried me. The one who lied. The ghost drifted closer. Will you lie too? No, Sa-Elam said softly. But I'll listen. The spirit paused. Then, with a sound like dry leaves shivering, it touched his hand. And in a flash, he saw her memory. A woman named Elenia. Once a healer. Loved by many, envied by more. Falsely accused of witchcraft during a fever outbreak. Beaten, buried alive in the hollow without trial. She had screamed for help beneath the soil. No one came. She died with the taste of earth in her throat and hatred in her heart. Her final thought, they will hear me now. The vision broke. Sa-Elam stumbled back, panting. The spirit of Elenia floated above her grave, form growing more solid, more vengeful. I can help you move on, he said. But her face, if it could be called that, twisted. No. I will not leave until they remember. Then the earth around them groaned. Hands burst from the soil. Dozens of corpses clawed their way free, skeletal, silent, bound by Elenia's rage. They did not attack, but surrounded Sa-Elam like an audience. And one by one, they began to sing. The same song. The same weeping melody. Each verse a name. Each name a plea for justice. Sa-Elam knelt, drawing a ritual circle around Elenia's grave. He poured ash from the monk's urn. He carried the ashes of Brother Alwyn, given before his death, with the words, "Let my light guide those who linger." He placed the seal in the center of the circle and began to chant. Light erupted, blue and silver. The spirits froze. Elenia screamed. The earth cracked. And then, a boy appeared. Not truly a boy, but the image of one. Elenia's son. Long dead. Created from memory, pain, and longing. He reached out. Mother. Her form broke. Shattered. And in that moment, she let go. The spirits fell to ash. The singing stopped. Dawn rose pale and golden. Sa-Elam buried the seal again in her grave. A second seal, one he had carried unknowingly, etched into his own soul. When he turned to leave, he found a stone marker beside her plot. It hadn't been there before. It read, Elenia of the Healing Hands. She was innocent. She was loved. She was betrayed. Sa-Elam bowed his head. As he stepped beyond the hollow's edge, the birds began to sing again. The forest around Sa-Elam thickened as he ventured deeper into the uncharted wilds. Moss hung like curtains from gnarled branches, the soil beneath his boots was damp and spongy, swallowing each step in silence. The map Mura had given him marked a forgotten site, an ancient tomb said to hold secrets older than any living memory. The air grew heavy, as if saturated with unseen eyes watching, waiting. The obsidian seal against his chest pulsed steadily, a heartbeat tied to the very earth itself. At the edge of a clearing, he found it, a weathered stone entrance half buried beneath vines and earth, its arch carved with faded runes curling like serpents. The smell of damp stone and decay drifted out like a warning. He hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The tomb was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and vaulted chambers. Shadows clung to the walls, twisting and flickering with the light from his staff. Strange carvings adorned the surfaces, faces contorted in agony, serpents coiled around skeletal hands, and eyes that seemed to blink as he passed. At the heart of the tomb lay a sarcophagus carved from black marble, its lid etched with a figure, a woman in flowing robes holding a single blooming rose. Sa-Elam knelt and traced the inscription, Illyra, Keeper of the Veil. Suddenly, the air shifted. A cold breath brushed his neck, and a voice whispered, soft, yet cutting through the silence like a blade, echoed in the chamber. Who dares awaken me? The seal burned hot. Sa-Elam's voice was steady. I am Sa-Elam, seeker and warden. I come to learn your truth. The lid of the sarcophagus slid open, revealing a woman pale, yet radiant, her eyes closed as if in eternal rest. But as he stepped closer, her eyelids fluttered, revealing irises as dark as midnight. She rose, graceful and ethereal, but her expression was clouded with confusion and pain. I do not remember, she whispered. Who am I? Sa-Elam extended his hand. You are Illyra, Keeper of the Veil, guardian of the ancient seals that bind the Watcher. Tears shimmered in her eyes. But I have forgotten everything, my purpose, my past. All that remains is the sorrow. Her voice cracked, and the tomb trembled. From the shadows stirred twisted wraiths born from forgotten memories, their forms barely human, their eyes hollow voids. They lunged. Sa-Elam drew the seal from beneath his cloak, its surface glowing fiercely. He chanted prayers of binding and light. The wraiths recoiled, shrieking like torn souls, before retreating into the darkness. Illyra watched, powerless, but then reached out. Her fingertips brushed the seal. A surge of energy pulsed through the chamber, momentarily illuminating the ancient carving scenes of sacrifice, battles between light and darkness, and the original binding of the Watcher. She gasped, memory returning in fragments, visions of a pact made centuries ago, her life given to hold back a darkness that could consume worlds. I was a prisoner, she said. Bound here to keep the Watcher asleep. Sa-Elam nodded solemnly. And your forgetting is a curse of the Watcher, to weaken the seals. Illyra sank to her knees. If I fall, so does the world. He knelt beside her, pressing the obsidian seal into her palm. Then we fight together. Outside the tomb, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Within, two souls, one forgotten, one seeking, prepared to face the shadows that had haunted the world for too long. The sun hung low, bleeding gold across the horizon as Sa-Elam approached Bausay, a village whispered about in fearful tones across the land. Nestled between rolling hills and dense jungles, Bausay was a place caught between worlds where the living and the dead brushed close enough to hear each other's breath. From the first step into the village, Sa-Elam sensed the weight of a curse pressing down. The villagers moved like shadows themselves, faces pale, eyes hollow, haunted by fear and secrets. Children hid behind curtains, and even the dogs yelped at unseen terrors. He was led to the village elder, a stooped woman named Ba-Lin, who wore a necklace of dried herbs and bones. Her voice was a rasp, but her eyes burned with fierce urgency. It began 3 moons ago, she said. Our people found a chest buried beneath the old banyan tree. They said it was treasure. A blessing. But it is a curse. Sa-Elam's gaze hardened. Tell me everything. She nodded, leading him to the ancient tree at the village's heart. Its roots twisted like serpents, clutching the earth where the chest had been unearthed. Ba-Lin continued, the chest contained relics, a crimson silk cloth, jade rings, and a small box sealed with runes none of us could read. From the moment it was opened, misfortune followed. Illness, deaths, disappearances. The dead no longer rest. They walk among us, but they are not our kin. Sa-Elam studied the ground. The air shimmered faintly, cold despite the tropical heat. His seal tingled, warning him. That night, under a sky swallowed by heavy clouds, Sa-Elam was summoned to the village square. A crowd had gathered, some praying, others trembling in fear. At the center lay a broken chest, splintered and blackened. Surrounding it were scattered relics, fragments of jade, threads of crimson silk stained dark. Suddenly, a woman's scream pierced the air. From the shadows, a figure emerged, pale as death, eyes glowing faint green, draped in the cursed silk. It moved with unnatural grace, limbs jerking like a marionette. The villagers recoiled. The woman, or what she had become, was trapped in a half-life, caught between worlds by the power of the chest. Sa-Elam stepped forward, the obsidian seal ablaze on his chest. He spoke words taught by Illyra, the keeper of the veil, prayers of binding and release. The spirit lunged, but his chant wove a barrier of light. The cursed woman shrieked, her form flickering, torn between agony and rage. As dawn approached, the village was silent again. Sa-Elam gathered the relics, vowing to cleanse and seal them once more. But as he worked, a shadow watched from the treetops, silent, patient, waiting. Bausay's curse was not ended. It had only just begun. The air was thick with tension as Sa-Elam prepared the sacred circle at the edge of Bao-Sei's village. Moonlight struggled through the dense canopy, casting mottled shadows that danced like restless spirits. The relics lay arranged in the center: crimson silk, jade rings, and the sealed box, each humming with latent power, pulsing in tune with the obsidian seal against his chest. The villagers gathered in a fearful semicircle, their faces pale but hopeful. Ba Lin, the elder, stood close, clutching a worn talisman. The ceremony was meant to cleanse the curse, to bind the restless spirits back into the veil from which they had emerged. Sa-Elam's voice was steady as he began the incantation, ancient words borrowed from the keepers before him. He traced sigils in the air, each stroke radiating light. The relics glowed faintly, responding to the ritual's call. But then, a sudden gust tore through the clearing, snuffing the lanterns, and chilling the bones of all present. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a tall, gaunt presence cloaked in ash-gray robes. Its face was hidden beneath a bone mask carved to resemble a serpent's skull. The same figure Sa-Elam had glimpsed in Hollow Vale. The masked one. A chilling silence fell. The villagers gasped, some stumbling back in terror. Sa-Elam's seal flared fiercely, burning with urgency. The masked one raised a pale hand, and the relics convulsed violently. The silk unraveled, twisting into serpentine tendrils that writhed like living things. The jade shards floated, spinning and spinning, until they shattered into dust. The sealed box burst open, releasing a black mist that coiled like a serpent, swirling with anguished whispers. The sacred circle shattered. The earth beneath the ritual site cracked, and a scream deep, ancient, and filled with malice pierced the night. The restless spirits howled in response, their forms rising from the shadows, eyes blazing with fury. They swirled around the clearing like a storm of wrath, deafening and blinding. Sa-Elam staggered back, shielded by the fleeting light of the seal. He tried to recite the binding words again, but his voice faltered, choked by the overwhelming presence of the Watcher's servant. The masked one advanced, its presence cold and oppressive, draining the warmth from the air. "You cannot hold back what is destined," it hissed, voice like rustling bones. "The seals will break. The Watcher will awaken." With a gesture, it sent a wave of dark energy toward Sa-Elam. He barely managed to raise a shield of light, the force crashing against it like thunder. The villagers screamed and scattered into the jungle, their prayers lost in the storm of darkness. As the masked one retreated into the night, Sa-Elam stood alone in the ruined circle, the relics destroyed, the seal on his chest cracked but still glowing faintly. His heart thundered with dread. The Watcher was stirring. And the true battle was only beginning. The morning sun struggled through a sky still heavy with storm clouds, casting a pale light on Bao-Sei's shattered village. The air hung thick with smoke and sorrow, mingling with the acrid scent of burned silk and shattered jade. Sa-Elam stood amid the ruins of the ritual clearing, his cloak heavy with rain and dust, the obsidian seal cracked but stubbornly glowing against his chest. The villagers were scattered, some fled into the surrounding jungle, others huddled in broken homes, whispering prayers to gods long silent. Ba Lin, the elder, approached with weary steps, her eyes reflecting a storm of grief and determination. "We've lost much," she said softly. "The relics are gone, the spirits more restless than ever. But you survived. And that is no small thing." Salem nodded, his gaze distant. The masked one's warning echoed in his mind, "The Watcher will awaken." "We must regroup," Salem said, voice steady despite the turmoil within. "There are others like you, like this village where darkness gathers. We cannot fight alone." B.A. Lin reached into her satchel and pulled out a tattered scroll. "There is a place, the sanctuary of the old keepers. It holds knowledge, weapons, and perhaps hope." Days passed as Salem helped rebuild the village's fragile defenses. He shared what little he knew of binding rites and ancient lore, teaching the villagers how to protect themselves from the shadows that now prowled their nights. But the nights grew darker. The dead no longer merely haunted, they hunted. One evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged hills, Salem heard the mournful howl of wolves, not in the forest, but just beyond the village borders. Shadows moved like living things, and the seal burned fiercely, warning of an approaching threat. He stood watch beneath the twisted branches of the banyan tree, the cursed chest long buried deep beneath its roots. The air thickened with cold as figures emerged, twisted, malformed creatures born of malice and forgotten pain. Salem drew his staff and whispered the prayers learned from Illyra and the keepers. Light burst forth, casting the creatures back into the darkness. But one slipped through, a towering beast cloaked in shadow, eyes burning like embers. It roared, shaking the earth beneath their feet. Salem met its gaze, raising the cracked seal. The battle was fierce and desperate, light against shadow, hope against despair. With a final surge of will, Salem drove the creature back, sealing it within a rune etched deep into the banyan's roots. Exhausted but unbroken, he turned to B.A. Lin. "This is only the beginning. The Watcher's influence grows. We must seek the sanctuary." Together, they gathered the bravest villagers, setting out at dawn toward the unknown, toward hope. As they disappeared into the forest's edge, the cracked obsidian seal pulsed steadily, a beacon in the gathering storm. The path to the sanctuary was treacherous, winding through dense thickets and shadowed valleys where light scarcely reached. Salem and the band of villagers traveled in uneasy silence, the air thick with the residue of forgotten sins. Every step seemed weighed down by history, echoes of a bloodline shattered long ago. B.A. Lin shared the tale one evening by the dying campfire, her voice low and steady. "There was once a family here, the Le family. Powerful sorcerers and keepers of forbidden knowledge. They wielded magic that bent the very fabric between worlds. But with power came hubris, and with hubris, betrayal." She paused, eyes fixed on the flickering flames. The Le family delved into dark pacts. They sought immortality, bargaining with spirits that should never be called. Their greed poisoned the land. Villages fell silent, rivers ran black, and crops withered. The elders tried to stop them, but the LES magic was too strong. The final blow came when the people revolted, driven by desperation and fear. The entire family was hunted down, their homes razed, their names cursed. None survived. Or so the story goes. Salem listened, feeling the familiar burn of the obsidian seal against his chest. Their curse lingers, Va Lin whispered. The Watcher's chains are tied to that bloodline's ruin. The restless spirits, the cursed relics, they are fragments of that past. That night, as Salem lay restless beneath the stars, the seal pulsed with an urgent rhythm. Visions flooded his mind, flashes of a grand estate burning, screams in a forgotten tongue, a family torn apart by shadows both literal and spiritual. He saw a young woman, eyes fierce yet haunted. She held a book bound in dark leather, its pages inscribed with cryptic symbols, the same symbols etched on the relics from Bausé. Le Tui, Salem murmured, sensing the name burn like a brand in his soul. She was the last of her line, a keeper of knowledge and secrets meant to guard the seals. But betrayal had shattered her life. Salem knew this was no coincidence. The Watcher's awakening was tied to the sins of the past, and only by confronting this legacy could the present be saved. At dawn, the group entered a forgotten ruin nestled in the mountains, once the Le estate, now a twisted skeleton of stone and sorrow. Inside, Salem felt the air thicken with ancient power. Whispered voices slithered through the halls, pulling at memories that were not his own. In the heart of the ruin, he discovered a hidden chamber, a sanctum where the last rites had been performed to bind the family's souls. There, a faded tapestry told the story of love, betrayal, sacrifice, and the final curse laid upon the bloodline. Salem reached out, touching the obsidian seal. It burned fiercely, resonating with the place. The past was alive, and it demanded reckoning. The moon hung low and pale over the ancient graveyard known as the Silent Fields. Salem stood alone among the weathered stones, the cold wind whispering secrets through the gnarled trees. The obsidian seal on his chest pulsed steadily, a beacon against the encroaching darkness. This was the place where the Watcher's influence was strongest, a threshold between worlds, where the veil was thin and restless spirits roamed free. Tonight, Salem had come to confront what lay beneath. As he stepped deeper into the graveyard, the air grew thick with cold dread. Shadows moved beyond sight, fleeting and sinister. The ground trembled faintly, as if the earth itself sought to warn him. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the mist, low and mournful. "Why have you come, seeker?" From the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in tattered robes, face hidden beneath a hood. Pale hands extended, clutching a rusted lantern that flickered with an unnatural flame. "I am Salem," he answered, voice steady despite the chill. "I seek to restore balance." The figure nodded slowly. "I am the keeper of forgotten souls. Long have I watched this place, guarding the restless, and waiting for one who carries the seal." A sudden gust extinguished Salem's lantern, plunging them into darkness. From the mist, whispers grew into anguished cries, spirits bound by pain and regret. The keeper raised the lantern. Its light revealed spectral forms swirling in agony, their faces twisted by betrayal and sorrow. "They are trapped," the keeper said. "By the Watcher's curse bound to this ground, unable to rest." Salem stepped forward, chanting an ancient prayer. The seal glowed fiercely, casting blue light that pushed back the shadows. Yet the spirits recoiled, shrieking. Then the ground cracked, and from the earth rose a towering wraith, a being of pure shadow, eyes burning like coals. It was the Watcher's emissary. Salem met its gaze, raising the seal. The battle began. Light clashed with darkness as Salem summoned all his strength. The spirits around them screamed and writhed, caught between hope and despair. With a final surge, Salem unleashed a wave of radiant energy, forcing the wraith back into the abyss. The ground sealed shut. Exhausted, Salem turned to the keeper. "The fight is far from over," the keeper warned. "The Watcher grows stronger. But you are not alone." As dawn broke, the graveyard fell silent, but the air remained heavy with the promise of battles yet to come. The moon was a pale witness in the sky as Salem returned to Bausé, the village now cloaked in an eerie stillness that belied the chaos that had once reigned. The cursed chest had been shattered, the relics lost, but the darkness had not lifted. It had only gathered strength. The villagers had fortified themselves within the remains of the chapel, lighting candles that flickered like fragile hopes. Their faces were drawn, haunted by nights of terror and days of silence. Salem stepped into the chapel's ruined nave, feeling the weight of the seal throbbing at his chest. His companions from before, including Balin, gathered close, their eyes seeking courage in his steady presence. Suddenly, the air grew thick with cold, and a shadow coalesced in the center of the chapel. The masked one stepped forth, taller, more imposing, its serpent skull mask gleaming with malevolent intent. "You cannot stop what is destined," it hissed, voice like bones scraping stone. "The Watcher's awakening is inevitable." Salem raised his staff, channeling the light of the ancient seal. The battle erupted, light against shadow, chance against curses, hope against despair. The chapel shook as energies clashed. The masked one summoned wraiths and nightmares, creatures born of forgotten fears and broken promises. Villagers screamed and fled, but Salem stood firm, a beacon amidst the storm. With every spell and prayer, the masked one retaliated fiercely, breaking wards and shattering defenses. But Salem remembered the lessons of Illyra, the strength of the fallen bloodline, and the unyielding spirit of those who had come before. As dawn threatened the horizon, Salem summoned a final surge of power, a radiant blast that shattered the darkness and forced the masked one to retreat, its form dissolving into the morning mist. Exhausted but victorious, Salem looked upon the villagers, weary but alive. "The battle is won," he said softly, "but the war is not over." The obsidian seal glowed steadily against his chest, a reminder that the Watcher's shadow still loomed. Together, they would face whatever darkness awaited. The dawn stretched slowly over Bausé, painting the sky in pale hues of rose and gold. The villagers emerged cautiously from the shadows of the ruined chapel, blinking as if waking from a long nightmare. Saelim stood at the center of the square, his breath steady despite the exhaustion that clung to his limbs like a second skin. The air was still no longer heavy with malice, but tinged with a fragile hope. For days, the village had been a battleground. The clash between light and shadow had left its scars, shattered homes, scorched earth, and hearts burdened with loss. But amid the ruin, something else had taken root, a promise. Saelim's seal pulsed softly beneath his tunic, no longer a burning warning but a gentle beacon, echoing the first true peace Bausé had seen in many moons. He raised his voice, addressing the weary crowd. "This victory is not mine alone," he said, eyes scanning the faces before him, some etched with tears, others gleaming with determination. "It belongs to each of you who held fast in the darkness, who refused to let fear conquer your hearts." Ba Lin stepped forward, her voice ringing clear despite the weariness. "The curse is broken," she said, "but our journey has only just begun. We must rebuild not just our homes, but our spirits." The villagers murmured their assent, gathering into groups to clear debris, mend walls, and tend to those wounded in body and soul. But Saelim knew the true work lay deeper. The Watcher's shadow still lingered, its chains loosened, but not yet broken. At night, beneath a sky studded with stars, Saelim knelt before the remains of the cursed chest, now buried beneath a fresh mound of earth and wildflowers. He traced the soil with reverence, whispering a prayer for the souls trapped by the dark magic contained within. The earth seemed to breathe beneath his fingers, a slow, steady pulse of life. Ilara's teachings echoed in his mind, that light could not exist without shadow, but that even the deepest darkness could be pierced by the smallest flame. And so Saelim vowed to kindle that flame wherever shadows gathered, wherever the Watcher's influence seeped. In the days that followed, word of Bausé's redemption spread like wildfire through the neighboring villages and towns. Travelers came, bearing gifts and stories of courage. The village square filled once more with laughter and song, a fragile melody of life reclaiming its place. Saelim, however, remained vigilant. Each night, he studied the ancient texts recovered from the sanctuary of the Old Keepers, searching for clues to strengthen the seals and bind the Watcher for good. His dreams were restless, filled with visions of the masked one and the creeping darkness beyond the veil. One evening, as a crimson moon rose, Saelim found himself standing before a glowing rune etched into the heart of the banyan tree in the village center. The symbol radiated power, ancient, potent, and alive. He pressed his hand to it, feeling the seal's warmth surge in response. The Watcher was watching. But so was the Seeker. And the story, far from over, was only growing more urgent. The night was thick with silence as the blood moon rose, casting an eerie crimson glow over the land. Saelim stood atop the cliff overlooking the village of Bausé, the wind tugging at his cloak, carrying the scent of distant fires and forgotten battles. Below, the village slept fragile and tentative under the watchful gaze of the moon. Tonight, he would make a vow. The obsidian seal at his chest burned steadily, like a heartbeat syncing with the pulse of the earth. Around him, the ancient stones hummed with forgotten power, waiting for the oath that would bind past, present, and future. Saelim knelt, tracing the air with a series of sigils taught by the keepers. Each stroke glowed faintly before fading into the night. He closed his eyes, letting the memories and voices of those who came before wash over him. "I swear," he whispered, voice resolute, "to guard the seals, to protect the veil between worlds, and to stand against the darkness that seeks to consume all." The wind picked up, swirling leaves and dust in a dance of shadows and light. The trees seemed to lean in, bearing witness. "Not for glory," Salem continued, "not for power, but for the innocent, the lost, and those who cannot fight." As the final words left his lips, the seal blazed bright, sending a pulse of energy rippling through the forest. The earth trembled lightly beneath his hands. Far below, a figure watched from the tree line, silent, unseen, a mask glinting faintly in the moonlight. Salem opened his eyes, feeling the weight of the vow settle deep within his soul. It was a promise that would shape the battles to come. For the Watcher was awakening. And the Seeker had sworn his oath. The night wrapped the world in a blanket of stars, each one flickering like a distant beacon in the vast darkness. Salem lay on the cold stone floor of the sanctuary, the weight of the day's burdens heavy upon his shoulders. His eyes closed, and sleep claimed him quickly, but the rest it promised was far from peaceful. His dreams pulled him through a swirling mist, a realm between worlds where time unraveled and shadows whispered secrets too old for mortal ears. In this twilight place, the air shimmered with fragments of memories, faint laughter, the rustling of leaves, and distant cries of loss. Then she appeared. The woman from his visions, the keeper of the veil Illyra. But now, her face was luminous, radiant with an otherworldly glow. She smiled softly, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and hope. "Salem," she spoke, voice like a melody caught on the wind. "You have walked far, yet the path grows darker still." He reached out, but her form shimmered and receded like mist, carried away on a breath of cold air. Before she vanished completely, she left him with a message, etched into his mind. "The Watcher stirs beneath the roots of the world. Old bonds will break, and new ones must be forged. Seek the beacons, the lights that guard the spiral. Only through them can balance be restored." Suddenly, the vision shifted. He saw a city of spiraling towers, its walls alive with shifting runes and endless corridors. Figures cloaked in light moved silently through the halls, guardians of knowledge and power. Then came a warning, shadows crawling at the edges of the city, a storm of darkness poised to engulf all. Salem awoke with a start, the seal on his chest burning brighter than ever. The message was clear, his journey was far from over. The beacons. The spiral. New mysteries, new allies, and new enemies awaited. But the call from the beyond had been heard. And the Seeker would answer. The horizon was ablaze with the dying embers of sunset as Salem stood atop the crumbling cliffs that overlooked the spiral valley. The wind tugged fiercely at his cloak, carrying whispers of old secrets and forgotten promises. Beneath him, the valley twisted and turned like a living labyrinth, a place where light and shadow wove an endless dance, and where the beacons awaited those brave enough to seek them. His journey had brought him far from Bausé, through ruined villages and haunted forests, into the very heart of the Watcher's awakening. But the visions in his dreams were clear only by finding the beacons and reigniting their light could the balance between worlds be restored. The first beacon was said to lie in the ancient city of Viralaya, a place lost to time and swallowed by the jungle's relentless grasp. It was a city of spiraling towers and endless corridors, filled with knowledge and guardians who had vowed to protect the world from darkness. As Salem descended into the valley, the air grew thick with humidity and the scent of wildflowers and decay. The ruins of Viralaya rose before him, colossal stone structures entwined with vines and roots, their surfaces etched with glowing runes that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. He entered through a shattered archway, feeling the weight of history pressing down. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant drip of water and the faint hum of magic in the air. Deeper into the city, Salem encountered the Guardians. They were ethereal beings of light and shadow, their forms shifting like smoke and flame. They tested his resolve and knowledge, challenging him with riddles of ancient lore and trials that pushed his spirit to its limits. Through wisdom and courage, Salem proved himself worthy. The Guardians led him to the heart of Viralaya, the chamber of the first beacon. There, a towering pillar of pure light rose from a pedestal inscribed with the spiral sigils. As Salem reached out to touch the beacon, a shadow fell across the chamber. The masked one appeared once more, flanked by twisted creatures born of nightmare and despair. A fierce battle erupted, light against darkness, hope against oblivion. Salem wielded the power of the obsidian seal and the knowledge of the keepers, while the masked one unleashed curses and shadows that clawed at his soul. The clash was brutal and relentless. Each strike of Salem's staff shattered darkness, but the masked one's resilience was terrifying. The chamber trembled with their fury. In a desperate move, Salem summoned the full strength of the first beacon, channeling its radiant energy through the seal. A blinding wave of light surged forth, engulfing the chamber and forcing the masked one and its minions into retreat. Breathless but victorious, Salem grasped the beacon. Its light flowed into the obsidian seal, strengthening it with newfound power. But the victory was bittersweet. From the shadows, a whisper echoed, the Watcher's gaze shifts. The spiral's defense has begun, but its price is yet to be paid. Salem knew the path ahead would be darker and more perilous. Many beacons remained, each guarded by ancient forces and deeper secrets. His journey was far from over. As he left Viralaya, the spiral-shaped towers bathed in the moonlight, Salem felt the seal pulse steadily, a beacon of hope and warning. The battle for the balance between light and shadow had only just begun. The valley lay cloaked in mist as dawn's first light crept over the horizon, casting a pale glow upon the worn path leading from the ancient city of Viralaya. Salem's steps were heavy, the weight of the first beacon's power thrumming within the obsidian seal against his chest, mingled with a deep ache, a reminder that light demanded sacrifice. The journey had taken its toll. His body bore fresh wounds, and his mind wrestled with shadows that clawed at his resolve. Yet beyond physical pain lay a deeper torment, the knowledge that each victory drew him closer to a truth he had long feared. As Salem descended the mountain trail, his thoughts drifted to the villagers of Vauce, their faces, hopeful yet scarred. He carried their prayers, their dreams, but also their grief. That evening, beneath a canopy of stars, he camped near the edge of a quiet forest. The air was still, save for the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Yet sleep evaded him. Vision seized his mind. He saw the Watcher, a towering figure shrouded in darkness, eyes like burning coals, its presence suffocating and immense. It reached out with shadowed hands, grasping at the spiral itself, seeking to unravel the seals and consume the world in endless night. Then came the cost. Faces of those he had lost flickered before him: Balin, Illyra, the villagers who had stood by him. Their sacrifices had been great, and more would be demanded. A voice whispered on the wind, soft yet clear. To protect the light, one must sometimes walk through darkness. Saelim awoke with a start. The obsidian seal flared brightly, and with it, a newfound understanding. He rose at first light, determined to press onward. The next beacon awaited in the frosted peaks, a place whispered about in legends as cold and unyielding as the trials that guarded it. Weeks passed as Saelim journeyed through frost-bitten passes and howling winds. The seal's power protected him from the biting cold, but it could not shield him from loneliness and doubt. At the summit of the highest peak, Saelim discovered a temple carved from ice and stone. Within, the guardian of the second beacon awaited a being of crystalline light and fierce judgment. The trials were merciless. Saelim faced visions of failure, loss, and despair, shadows that sought to break his spirit and shatter his resolve. But through each challenge, he held fast to his oath, drawing strength from memories, purpose, and the flickering flame of hope. When he finally touched the second beacon, a surge of energy coursed through him, healing wounds both seen and unseen. The seal glowed with renewed brilliance, its power tempered by sacrifice and understanding. Yet as he descended, the winds carried a warning. The Watcher's forces were gathering, dark clouds on the horizon signaling an approaching storm. Saelim's journey was no longer just one of discovery, but of war. And in the coming battles, some sacrifices would be irreversible. The land was darkened beneath a gathering storm, and the wind carried whispers of battle yet to come. Saelim stood upon a ridge overlooking the vast plains where the forces of the Watcher had begun to marshal their power. The obsidian seal upon his chest pulsed like a second heartbeat, a reminder of the weight he bore, the burden of keeping the worlds balanced. Since reclaiming the second beacon, the spiral of events had spun ever tighter. Word reached Saelim of villages razed by shadow creatures, forests corrupted by unseen rot, and skies blotted out by swirling darkness. The Watcher was not merely awakening, it was preparing to strike. The companion Saelim had gathered warriors, scholars, and those touched by the veil assembled beneath banners flickering with light and hope. Together, they prepared for a war that would decide the fate of all realms. In the days before battle, Saelim found himself haunted by visions, memories not his own, fragments from the fallen bloodline of El-Itwi. Faces of ancestors long dead, bearing sorrow and warning, filled his dreams. One night, in the silence of camp, a messenger arrived bearing a worn parchment sealed with crimson wax. It told of a traitor within their ranks, one who had turned to the Watcher's promises for power and immortality. This betrayal threatened to unravel everything. The revelation struck deep. trust would be tested. As the armies clashed beneath thunderous skies, Sa-Elam fought not only the tangible horrors of shadow beasts and twisted souls but also the invisible wounds of doubt and deception among his own. The battle raged fiercely. Light and shadow collided in a tempest of wills, the earth itself trembling beneath their feet. Amid the chaos, Sa-Elam confronted the Masked One once again, now revealed to be a former keeper corrupted by greed and despair. Their duel was brutal, a tempest of power and purpose. Sa-Elam drew upon the strength of the beacons, the sacrifices of his allies, and the unyielding promise of his oath. With a final, searing strike, he shattered the Masked One's mask, revealing a face twisted by sorrow and rage, a mirror of what could become if one lost faith in the light. As dawn broke over the scarred battlefield, the Watcher's forces retreated into the shadows, their plans delayed but not destroyed. Sa-Elam stood among the fallen, weary but unbroken. The war was far from over. And as the spiral turned, new truths awaited, ready to reshape the destiny of all. The air hung heavy with the scent of rain and ash as Sa-Elam stood alone atop the spiral peak, the world sprawled beneath him in tangled forests, shadowed valleys, and flickering lights. The obsidian seal on his chest pulsed steadily, a beacon amidst the gathering storm that threatened to consume all. He had faced darkness beyond imagining, wielded the power of ancient beacons, and carried the hopes of countless souls. Yet, standing there in the quiet, he knew the final battle was not against a single foe, it was a choice, a reckoning of light and shadow within and without. Memories of all he had lost and all he had protected flashed through his mind: Ilara's gentle strength, Ba Lin's unwavering courage, the villagers of Bausei who dared to hope. The Masked One's broken mask, a reminder of the thin line between salvation and ruin. The Watcher stirred in the depths below, its power rising like a tide that could drown worlds. And Sa-Elam's heart beat in rhythm with the spiral, the endless cycle of creation and destruction, light and shadow, life and death. Before him lay two paths. One led to the beacon of dawn, a source of pure, radiant light capable of banishing the Watcher forever, but at the cost of severing the spiral's balance, risking the unraveling of the very fabric that held the realms together. The other path led to the Shadow Gate, a portal to embrace the darkness, to contain the Watcher by merging light and shadow, forging a new harmony but risking corruption and loss of self. Sa-Elam closed his eyes, feeling the seal warm against his skin. The voices of those who walked before him whispered in the wind, urging, warning, hoping. He took a deep breath. The choice was his alone. Stepping forward, he reached toward the path of light, then paused, turning his gaze to the shadowed road. Balance was the true key. With resolve burning brighter than ever, Sa-Elam took the path between the spiral itself. His steps echoed in the silence as he began the ritual to weave light and shadow into a new seal, one that could bind the Watcher and protect all worlds in harmony. The winds howled. The earth trembled. Stars blazed. And the spiral turned once more. Tuta Truyen. The Seeker's Spiral, the awakening of the Watcher. Mo Ta Truyen. In a world teetering on the edge of light and shadow, young Sa-Elam, a boy born under a mysterious blood moon, carries an ancient obsidian seal that binds the fate of all realms. From the haunted villages of Bausay and Grenmere to the lost city of Viralaya and beyond, Saelim's journey unfolds as he confronts restless spirits, dark curses, and a malevolent entity known only as the Watcher. Guided by visions, ancient keepers, and the sacred beacons of the spiral, Saelim must unravel forgotten legacies, battle shadows both within and without, and face impossible choices that will determine the balance of existence. As the Watcher awakens and the spiral of fate tightens, the Seeker's courage and sacrifice become the last hope for salvation. A sweeping tale of mystery, sacrifice, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness, where every step forward is a step into the unknown, and every choice echoes across worlds.